Fluids and effects in Seneferu's procedural pipeline. The fluids and effects in Seneferu's pipeline is the same like what you may have watched for simulating clothes and hair. Everything in Seneferu have the same logic and way of thinking, and the production manager is dealing with everything with the same brain and the same logic. So it's recommended that you watch the clothes and hair videos before you proceed with this one, because that will save you a lot of time and will help you understand this session. The first thing you will have to do, of course, is to log into your production manager, and if you have any fluid task, for example, or effects task is assigned to you, let's try by the fluid tasks. This is a setup for fluid setup for a steam train. When you click on this task, and of course I selected here Houdini because I want to make this setup this time in Houdini, not Maya. So I will, when you set the task to current, this will connect you to Seneferu's task control in Houdini, and I will set the task to in progress, then load dependencies. This will load the all the dependencies you see in the scene to all the dependencies you see for the task. It will be loaded in Houdini because this is the application that we are using, and then here we will build a setup that we can reuse again for to simulate shots. The concept of having a setup that when we later work on a fluid simulation task for the train on per shot basis, the setup will come and the animation for the train will retarget the static rig that we have now. Then you can just run the simulation and according to the setup that we are going to do now. So we want to do a setup and we test it with a simple animation. Then later when this is retargeted by the shot animation, then the setup should behave as expected and produce the expected result steam from the setup. So I made just a rough setup here for the train steam, but the thing that you need to take care of, that when you are writing the cache, you need to write it to the sandbox under the hip name, and you have to put an extension to the folder path, because this is important in Seneferu, because the system needs to know the type of this publish. So the cache needs to have this extension, which should be the same extension of the cache type. And here I actually shouldn't put it like this. I had to put only the object name because the heap name is already there. And by the way, when this is published, the whole path will be changed. This will be the asset inversion and stuff like that. So, but in the temporary file, so you don't overwrite anything by mistake, it's recommended that you follow this method of naming the things. Also, I'm using the object name here because later when we switch between shots, we don't want this name to change. We want the steam of the train to always have the same name as it was named in your recipe here. So this is something to consider. So I will publish this setup now. So I made this, and Now we are fine to publish this setup. You will click on publish and take a snapshot from the scene, doesn't matter what. Yeah. And of course, since you are doing such setup, then you are supposed that you already had Play Blast or whatever. Then you can also drag and drop that Play Blast or simulation preview to the setup for reviewing purpose, so the supervisor or whoever needs to see it and check it, and we can discuss it and see if this is approved or not. Then once it's approved by the supervisor, then as you see that the production manager will notify all the users that are having simulation tasks that becoming ready to start according to the approval of the setup. They will be notified that their tasks are ready to start. In that case, because I'm assigned on one of them, then I'm notified that my task for the fluid simulation for the train is ready to start, actually, because both the animation of the train for the shot and the fluid simulation setup is already, both of them are finished. So now when I set my simulation task to in progress and I click on load dependencies, this as usual, the production manager will load all the dependencies needed to do your job. In this case, it will load the fluid setup, and it will retarget the static rig. As you see here, it has retargeted the static rig that we used to build the setup, has been retargeted by the animation of the train. If this is a proper setup that I made, then the source of the steam should be constrained to the train, of course, so you don't have to move it manually or anything. So now if you see this rig, you will find that this rig is actually now pointing to the animation of the train, or to be more specific, the approved version of the animation of the train, which is the versionless file. That is what the versionless button here means. So now that's it, and as we agreed before, our setup is pointing to a temporary location, so we are fine to cache. But again, I had a mistake here. This was supposed to be frame end. Yeah, that's it. So now we are fine, and you can actually skip the pre-roll or the relax frames if you have to. By the way, you need to also define the start time based on the shot requirements, because in our case the shot starts at 1107 and there are 101 frames for relaxing the simulation. This is what we usually do. So the start of the simulation should be this frame, but the cache can start from here, or you can give some handle, 5-frame handles or something. So we can start this simulation from here. So that's it. Then I, of course, will do the simulation and will show you how we publish it once the simulation is done. And now after the simulation is done, all what you need to do is to click on publish. You can take a snapshot. And now I will point to the folder of the cache that I made, and I will say open. This will now publish the Houdini scene and the cache that I publish. Because this simulation is supported to be done on the farm, then there is an action, publishing action, that is asking you if you want to publish this on the farm. But because I already finished the cache and I fed it to the system, then I don't need to do that. I will just say just publish. Saying yes. Okay, so that's it. Now these are the files that were published, and notice that this is now having the proper name and the proper version. In addition to that, the versionless file is this, which is the current floor version of the file. That is the versionless file. So that's it. But of course, there are a lot of situations when there will be several caches for the project, and some baking and reading and stuff like that. To do this, you have to collect all the caches in one folder that have the extension as mentioned before, like VDB or whatever the cache type you are making, and place them all in this sandbox folder. And at the end, when you publish the simulation, you will have to drag and drop them to the task container as we did several times in previous videos, or you can select them as I did during the publish now. But make sure that any cached nodes that is configured to read from disk, that these caches has to be published to the task first. So when it's reading, it should be reading from the correct published version, so it doesn't read from a directory that is outside the project tree. Let's create another type of simulations, like for example, we have here this asset. Notice that we are in the assets table, so this is not a simulation for shot or anything, but it's a generic fluid sim that I want to make, like some flames that I can simulate, for example, 10 seconds or something, so we can reuse it in shots rather than keep simulating again and again. So this simulation, now we can simulate, for example, 10 seconds. So as you see, when we set the task to current, we can see the dependencies. In this case, it's this object. And when we do load dependencies, so that's what we get. So I will just create some flames here, then I will resume recording. So it's just a simple setup and 10 seconds cache. Then what we can do now is to, as we did the last time, we can just click on publish. It's also recommended that you create Playblast or Flipbooks and publish it with the assets, so it can go to. Again, it's asking if we want to submit this to the farm. We will say just publish, and that's it. Actually, I I didn't write the cache, so I will show you how to append the cache if it wasn't there during the publish. So let's save this to disk. It shouldn't take time. Okay, finished. And now let's browse to it. Just browse to the cache and drag and drop the cache to the asset like this, then say append to this. Append to this means that append this file or folder to the currently selected version from the list. So now we have the setup and the cache. This is 10 seconds cache that will be reusable in shots and scenes later.